All right, y'all, you're Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and a bad call on the officials cost the Falcons in a valiant chance for a comeback. And we'll also talk about why Marcus Mariota is not to blame for the Falcons falling into a 21-0 hole in what ultimately proved a 21-15 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on today's Rapid Reaction.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. your very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So, guys, today's Locked On Falcons, we're talking rapid reaction to this Week 5 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a valiant effort for the Falcons to take it all the way down to the wire. We'll talk about the story of the game with the blown call on the roughing the passer on Grady Jarrett at the end that cost the Falcons a chance to potentially finish this game. We'll talk about Marcus Mariota and his performance and why he's not really to blame that much for the Falcons falling into their hole. We'll talk about the offensive line, and then we'll talk about the positives from this game and why people, despite the disappointment of once again losing to Tom Brady, why there are positives to take away from this game about this team and the direction that they're headed in. But let's talk first about what is going to be the biggest story from this game, that bad roughing the passer penalty against Grady Jarrett with about 3 minutes left in the game. It was basically a third down with 3 minutes left. The Falcons needed to get a stop there on that third down to force a punt at the end of the game, down 21-15. Grady Jarrett loops around on a stunt, wraps up. Tom Brady rolls him over on a textbook tackle and sack and whatever. NFL's, the officials blow a roughing the passer call. It's circulated all across social media. I'm sure you've all seen it or heard it by now at this point in time. Terrible call. Now, longtime listeners know I'm not one that typically likes to blame officiating too often, right? My grandfather was an official in high school and college. I have cousins that have followed in his footsteps. So, I have, I'm aware that it's a hard job and people are going to miss calls. We know that the officiating in the NFL has been very bad for many years. And at this point in time, my takeaway is just generally like, okay, bad officiating is just part of the game at this point in time. But it absolutely was a terrible call. And especially given it was a roughing the passer penalty, which I've been very vocal over the last couple of years, is kind of a joke of a penalty because they're always messing this call up constantly. And it was only the kind of the period at the end of the sentence for what was generally bad officiating throughout the game, right? Both sides got missed calls, right? Both the Bucs and the Falcons, right? Vita Vea had a roughing the passer penalty earlier in the game that shouldn't have been a flag, where he just basically bumped into Marcus Mariota and they flagged him, right? That final drive, what we're talking about in the fourth quarter with 3 minutes left, it was the 2 plays prior to that, the refs missed calls, right? 2 plays earlier, they missed a hold on AJ Terrell, right? They flagged AJ Terrell for a holding penalty where he didn't hold him, right? He Mike Evans released off the line. He grabbed him like, there was contact 3 yards down the field, but he let go by the time they got to the 5 yards, but they'd still call the holding. Then the very next play, the Bucs go deep to Scotty Miller. D. Alford initiates the contact, knocks Scotty Miller out of bounds so he can't catch the football. It should have been DPI. They don't call that. And me sitting here thinking, oh, okay, well, that was the makeup call for missing the hold on AJ Terrell, or calling the hold on AJ Terrell the previous play. And then, of course, the very next play is where the Grady Jarrett roughing call cost the Falcons. And would I say that it cost the Falcons the game? No, because the Falcons the reason why the Falcons were down 21-0 going into the fourth quarter was not due to the poor officiating, but it did certainly cost them a chance to win the game late. And so it leaves us with this bitter taste in our mouths because we sit here and say what could have been had the Falcons forced that punt, gotten the ball back with 3 minutes to go. Could they have gone down the field and won the game? And what doubly makes it worse is because I thought Grady Jarrett had a great game. He finished the game with 2 quarterback hits and a bunch of pressures. I know Brady completed 35 of 52 passes in this game, and I know some of those incompletions were account of pass broken up or drop passes, but let's say there was maybe 12 times where Brady missed throws in this game, and it would not surprise me if we go and watch the film, like half of those misses were due to Grady Jarrett getting some form of pressure. So he was disrupted throughout the game. It was the 3rd week in a row where Grady Jarrett stepped up in the fourth quarter to make the sort of pivotal defensive stop, and of course the officials were like, nah. So we will continue today's episode, moving on from that point, and talk about why are some of the reasons for the Falcons' slow start in this game and why they found themselves in that 21-0 hole in the first 3 quarters. And that will lead us to a conversation about Marcus Mariota, who did not play particularly well, but I don't think he's really the problem here for the Falcons, at least in this particular game. And we'll get into that as we continue today's episode. But before we get there, I do have to plug the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed. Not only can you find 3 shows for 4 hosts breaking down local and national sports headlines, but Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube is also the home for the postcast for the Locked On Braves and Locked On Falcons. Get the reaction live immediately after every Braves win and loss this postseason on Locked On Braves postcast, as well as the live reaction from myself and Jarvis Davis every Sunday immediately after the Falcons game on that Locked On Sports Atlanta YouTube page. So subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts. And when you subscribe to it on YouTube, make sure you hit that bell as well so you know when we go live. Now, guys, let's talk a little bit about Prize Picks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 10 times money on your entry. And the great thing about Prize Picks is you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections, and you can have projections for any sport that you care about, whether it's the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, and so much more. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you have to do to play is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play this fun new way of daily fantasy sports. And first-time users get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks is going to give you $100 to play with. Don't forget to enter that promo code Locked On at signup, LOCKEDON at signup for an instant deposit match up to $100. So as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I do want to plug, as your second listen, after you made Locked On Falcons your first listen, check out Locked On NFL, especially Monday, where you can get the recap of all the big action over the weekend. I'm sure they may be weighing in on that roughing the passer penalty on Grady Jarrett as well, because I'm sure that will be a big story all weekend long. But moving on from that conversation, let's talk a little bit about Marcus Mariota and the play of the Falcons through the first 3 quarters and why they fell into that 21-0 hole. And I'll say up front, I don't think Marcus Mariota was terrible in this game. He did certainly miss some throws in this game, but as I've said many times on this podcast over the last several weeks, that's just kind of part of the Mariota coaster. You're going to get the highs, you're getting the lows, the peaks, the valleys, whatever you want to call it. So relative to, I think, past games that we've seen from Mariota this year, I think this was probably one of his better games. Now, you can certainly argue that the bar is really low for Mariota at this point, especially going back to last week's Browns game. But we'll see if that notion, that belief that I have sitting here Sunday evening, holds up when I watch the film later this week. So I think it's more than fair to criticize Mariota at this point in time. He has not played great football at this point in time. I think it's more than fair for people to believe that this team and this offense would be better with Desmond Ridder at the helm. I don't disagree with you guys. I do think there is a lot of room for growth for this offense. And I do think, based off what we saw from Desmond Ridder this summer in the preseason, there's a lot of reasons to believe that he could facilitate that growth, right? Essentially, the Falcons, as they're calling this offense, Mariota was like 5 for 14 in the first half, and then I think it was like 9 for 10 in the second half, or something along those lines. But a lot of those completions in the second half were easy throws, screen passes, or whatever. And it's very clear that the last 2 weeks, especially in the second halves of these games, with Mariota getting off to these slow starts, they're calling, Arthur Smith is drawing up an offense that is designed to basically make it easy for the quarterback and to minimize the quarterback's impact on the offense. And you sit here and you say that's exactly what you would do if you had a rookie quarterback in there. So why not have it with the rookie? It is a more than fair question, I think, guys. It's more than a worthwhile conversation. I'm sure many of you, would love to argue and yell about it, but it's a worthwhile conversation. But frankly, the reason why I'm not as, pounding the table, we got to make a quarterback change, because I don't think the team is ready to make that move. And so to me, it's just kind of yelling in the wind at that point in time. Now, I certainly think it's more than fair to question why the team isn't ready to make that move. And I'll be honest with you, I'd be lying to you if I told you that part of the reason why I am not as gung-ho about making that move is because I sit here and I go like, somebody several months ago said that maybe the time to make the move for Ridder would be around week 8 or so. And there's a part of me just out of pettiness over all the people, certainly the Mariota stands back in August, that were sitting here saying, oh, Ridder's not going to play. I'm like, okay, Arthur, let's just wait 2 more weeks, right? Let's just give it Mariota 2 more weeks to see what he can do. Do me a solid, just so I can go back and be extra petty towards those people. So again, there's selfish reasons right now, guys, for why I kind of want to see a little bit more of Marcus Mariota. I'm kidding, of course, but I don't think, to be more honest and be truthful, I don't think Mariota was really the problem today, right? Like when you look at the reason why the Falcons were scoreless on their first 6 drives, I don't think it was on Mariota. Like you look at the opening drive, Felipe Franks dropped a would-be first down, right? Then the ensuing third down, Mariota was sacked by Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who beat Jake Matthews on the spin move. Then the second drive, you had a Drew Dolman holding penalty wipe out a 24-yard gain to Drake London on a third down. Then on the third series, that was pressure, again, Tryon-Shoyinka, I'm sorry, beating, I think, Jake on that play and flushing Mariota and pressuring him on that play to force a missed throw there. Then on the fourth series, right before halftime, Hodge dropped a would-be first down on a screen pass, and then Mariota was sacked the next down. Then you have Younghoe Koo missing that 52-yard field goal. Then to start the third quarter, a sack kills that drive. This one coming from our old friend Deidrin Senat. I'll be curious to watch the film, but it looked like part of the reason why Senat had the time to get to Mariota, it was a coverage sack, because the Falcons probably only sent like 2 receivers out on the route and neither of them got open. And that's been that to me was a common element today, where you seem like Mariota was holding on to the ball because the Falcons were only sending out 2 receivers, which we've seen time and time again with this offense. You also note that Elijah Wilkinson was flagged twice on that drive, being an ineligible blocker downfield that wiped out a 17-yard gain on a screen pass to Tyler Algier. Then on the 6th drive, you had a sack to end that drive on a play action pass on a 3rd and 1. Then the Falcons do score on their 7th drive, going into at the start of the 4th quarter on an Avery Williams nice run on a touchdown play. And then the ensuing drive, the Falcons have to punt the ball again, and then that ended on a play action pass on a sack on a 3rd and 16, right? And it's like, why are you calling play action on a 3rd and 16? Who are you trying to sell run to? All right. But you also had, a 15-yard penalty, like a play before that on Elijah Wilkinson as well on a face mask penalty. So, I think really when you look at it in conjunction, it's not really on Mariota's the problem here with why the Falcons struggled offensively in this game, right? Again, I'm not saying that he played great or anything like that, but like to me, it was more of the guys up front, right? The fact that we're facing one of the better defenses in the league and their offensive line did not come to play really today with the penalties and with the sacks allowed, right? And if you want to sit here and say, hey, this offense would be better with Desmond Ridder, again, I'm not going to sit here and fight you on that. If that's your opinion, that's a valid opinion. But like to me, the bigger takeaway from this game is not, hey, Marcus Mariota stinks. The bigger takeaway was this was the first game where the offensive line looked bad, where the offensive line came back down to earth go playing like the offensive line that we were worried about we were going to have, at the outset of the season. And so basically my takeaway is like, yeah, you can certainly argue that maybe Ridder hits on some of those early overthrows that Mariota didn't hit on. But is Ridder changing the narrative, moving the needle when the blocking is as inefficient and as ineffective as it was in this game, the pass protection, right? Is he magically going to be able to create separation for two receivers releasing into the route? Or is he going to make call play action on the 3rd and 16, right? And part of the issue, I think, for the Falcons was they constantly find themselves in 3rd and long situations, right? It was 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 17, 3rd and 16, all these various things. And then you contrast that with what the Bucs were able to do. They faced a ton of 3rd and short. So you look at times when it was 3rd and 7 or shorter, the Bucs faced 10 out of their 15 third down tries came in that, and they converted 70% of them. The Falcons only had 5 of those, and most of those, I think 4 of them came in the fourth quarter, right? And they converted like 3 of them, and I think the 2 that they failed to convert were due to pressure and sacks, right? So like you look at that situation, and like the Falcons, of course, they only go 3 for 9 on 3rd downs because they're facing all these they were their 3rd down percentage, but on the 3rd and longs, they were 3 for 9 on those 3rd and longs. So like that's part of the issue. You give up 5 sacks, 10 quarterback hits, you have 4 penalties on the offensive line alone that cost you 35 yards and probably at least 3 first downs. So again, and this to me is the bigger issue than the quarterback itself. It's the offensive line. And, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the comments or on Twitter, arguing for or against Mariota, and blaming the offensive line if you're for Mariota, and being like, who cares if you're against Mariota, all that stuff and more. So again, I think it's more than fair to criticize Mariota for his play in this game. And I'm sure, potentially on Wednesday when we're doing the all 22 review, I'll be more critical of Mariota after reviewing the film, possibly. But to me, the concern to me right now is less about Marcus Mariota's play, and it's more about this offensive line, right? Because if we're going to make the switch to Ridder, and this offensive line is going to look more like the unit that looked like today, especially coming up against some of these tougher defenses and these teams with some formidable pass rushers, that's going to be a bigger issue moving forward than, hey, Mariota versus Ridder or whatever the case may be. So we need this offensive line who play better, certainly by the time we make that switch to Desmond Ridder. But that's where we'll leave that conversation, and we'll talk about why I still come away from this game, despite the disappointing loss, feeling much better about this football team and its long-term growth in the Arthur Smith era. And we'll talk all about that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, let me tell you about the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. And of course, I'm talking about Built Bar, but Built Bar is even better than a candy bar because it not only tastes good, it's good for you, because Built Bars are low in sugar, calories, and carbs, but high in protein, high in fiber. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and you can get limited time flavors like the Mud Pie Bar. You can get the German chocolate flavor, or you can get tried and trues like cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut almond, cherry barcia, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel, raspberry, and so much more. And of course, you want to head to the website today, because Built Bar is always unveiling new flavors each and every week throughout the fall. So head on over to built.com and buy yourself a box for yourself, whether it's a mixed box or find your favorite flavor, and use the promo code LOCKEDON15 when you do, and you'll get 15% off your order. That's LOCKEDON15, LOCKEDON15, for 15% off at built.com. So before we wrap up today's episode, guys, if you want to get the same great coverage of the local teams on the Locked On Sports Atlanta, and you have Roku or an Amazon Fire TV, there is now a Locked On Sports Atlanta app. So download it so you can see this handsome face on your television if you have Roku or Amazon Fire TV. So going back to the conversation about this team and the offensive line, and we'll talk about the positives, right? And I thought, even though the pass protection was not good today, and we saw it kind of revert back to the old units that we've seen against this Tampa Bay Bucs defense that was able to get pressure on the quarterback, particularly up the interior. I do think the Falcons did have a healthy run game in this game, right? All right, they ran for 151 total yards. 61 of those came from Mariota, who was their leading rusher. But when you look at the running backs, they combined for 90 rushing yards on 24 carries, which is about 3.8 yards per carry. They did have a success rate of about 46%, which is a healthy number given. So the Falcons were able to find some success running the football. I did think, even though Mike Evans did get the better of AJ Terrell in a couple of plays, particularly one where he beat him on a deep comeback, and AJ Terrell then ran into his own teammate, and Evans was able to run down before he got knocked out at the half-yard line, and then they scored soon thereafter. He looked like the Falcons did ask Terrell to shadow Evans, and for the most part, again, it's all relative, right? Outside of one or two plays, and then you compare it to how he looked against Evans as a rookie, where he got cooked in that game. I think AJ Terrell did a really good job. So, seems to be progressing when it comes to, having that concern about dealing with the bigger receivers. So I think that was progress for him there. When it looked like the defense, it seemed like the Bucs were continuously attacking the middle of the field. Fournette led the team with like 10 catches in this game. So I think one of the things I'll be focused on in the film is kind of examining sort of the linebacker play, where the Bucs seem to take advantage of that. One of the other things I noticed many times was the Bucs would kind of wait for the Falcons to sub in both Timmy Horn and Matt Dickerson, and then they would get a positive play and they go no huddle to try to keep the Falcons from being able to sub in guys like Jarrett and Graham on the interior. And maybe, again, we'll see what the film says, but I still kind of think the Falcons probably would be a better team with Anthony Rush than they would be with either one of those two, Dickerson and Horn, that is, getting significant snaps on Sunday. The other notable thing is Michael Walker did exit the game with a groin injury. Ade Ogundeji exited the game with a shoulder injury. Hopefully those two issues are not serious. Ade's injury is a little bit more concerning to me, given, those shoulder injuries can, sprained shoulders, separated shoulders, those types of things can be long-term issues. Groin injury may be a week or two injury. And one of the things that makes me less concerned about Walker's injury is I did think Troy Anderson kind of stepped up in the fourth quarter, sort of filling in for him. Again, we'll report back when we watch the All-22. But sort of, again, all of these takeaways from the game, while it was by no means a great performance from the Falcons, I did like the fact that they battled to the end. I did not expect them to win, as you guys that were listening to the podcast all week long and for several months now know that I did not have expectations that the Falcons would win. But I wanted to see if they could run the ball against the Bucs defense. They seemingly checked that box. Again, they didn't dominate or anything, but they ran the ball enough, particularly in the second half of the game, to keep this offense on schedule. I wanted to see if Grady Jarrett would put the cape on and have a dominant game, and I thought he did. Right, he checked that box. Right, I wanted to see AJ Terrell, keep Mike Evans mostly contained in this game, and I thought he did that as well. We weren't sitting here watching Drew Dalman get absolutely wrecked by Vita Vea all game long. Drew Dalman, had some negative plays and all that stuff, but like, it wasn't this situation where it's like, oh God, like this guy can't do the job. So I feel like the Falcons checked most of the boxes that I wanted to see them check. Right. And so I come away from this game feeling relatively good about the direction of this football team. Right. I wanted to see this Falcons offense, defense, I'm sorry, keep this Bucs offense contained for the most part. And they kind of check that box as well. Right. Like, we've seen this Bucs offense put like 40 burgers up on this defense in the past. Right. We've seen, this team, do a lot of bending and a lot of breaking, but the Bucs were only 2 for 5 in their red zone trips, guys. Right. That's bend but don't break defense. So what the Falcons have been preaching is seemingly working. Right. So I generally come away from this game feeling pretty good about this football team. I don't sit here expecting them to beat the 49ers next week. I don't expect them to beat the Bengals next week, but I do expect them to play competitive and good football and make these games go down to the wire as they did on Sunday. And that, to me, is, again, moral victories. You can say whatever you want about that, but that to me is a lot more meaningful at this point in time in this rebuild than beating these football teams. Again, we talked about this a number of times. Tampa Bay, San Francisco, Cincinnati, these are potential Super Bowl contending teams. All three of these teams so far this year have played top 10 defenses, and we know Tampa Bay has an offense that hasn't played like it, but has the capability of being a top 10 offense. We know San Francisco has that capability. We know Cincinnati has that capability. And so if and when those offenses start catching up to where their defenses are right now, those are going to be Super Bowl contending teams. And the fact that the Falcons can go toe to toe with these teams and make them sweat, in the final closing minutes of the fourth quarter, to me is a positive sign. The Falcons aren't there. Right. This season has never, to me, been about this team making the playoffs. It's always been about this rebuild and showing that this team and this regime has the team on the correct path by going up against some of these quality opponents and being able to say, like, we can play with these guys, right? That you can get this collection of talent, inferior, whatever you want to call it, and get them to play above and beyond themselves. And they did that. No Patterson, no Pitts. London missed some time late in the game when they were going for the score and getting the 2-point conversion. He wasn't on the field out there. So guess what? Cordero Hodge stepped up in that. And so you did all these things. You were able to run the football against one of the better defenses in the league. You were able to move the ball against one of the better defenses in the league. And you were able to keep one of the potentially better offenses in the league in check for the most part and keep this game winnable. When you go down 21-0, it could have easily been like a 45-0 game, but guess what the Falcons did? They got 3 consecutive 3-and-outs to give this offense a chance to get back in the game. It was too little too late at that point in time, but you look at it and you say, hey, if they play a cleaner first half, you minimize the penalties, you do a better job with your pass protection, you minimize the drops, you do a better job tackling some of those things, tighten up the coverage a little bit, some of those things. And who knows? This could have been the shocker of all shockers, where the Falcons started off fast and could potentially finish strong and may walked away with a victory. So I look at that as a positive step in a positive direction for this football team. So I come away from this game, while disappointed with how it ended, I do come away overall feeling much better about this football team than I did going into the Sunday. And that's been, to me, the story heading into this week. It wasn't, we all wanted to see this team win. We're hoping that we can get that final win against Brady, and who knows, we'll get that week 18. Desmond Ridder will be starting, and he'll be 7-2 as a starter or something crazy like that, and then he'll be able to finally get that victory against Brady in week 18. So we can always hold out the hope for that. But again, I think this team is moving in the right direction. So that's where we're going to leave it, guys. If you have any feedback that you want to provide on anything I've discussed on today's episode, of course, you can hit me up on social media, Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. Send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here in the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, or you can hit me up on the Locked On Falcons Discord. Those are also the same places where if you have film related question that you want me to investigate Monday evening and Tuesday morning when I sit down and watch the film this week from this game, of course, those are also the places to hit me up there, guys. But that's where we'll leave it. We'll obviously have more thoughts on this game as the week unfolds before we turn our attention to the 49ers a little bit later in the week. And guys, before we duck out of here, thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen, and for your second listen, in addition to the Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks, NBA season kicking off, Locked On Braves, MLB season, is winding down, and Locked On Bulldogs to see if those pesky Georgia Bulldogs, will they ever get number 1 votes? I'm like, why is Alabama number 1? I don't get it, but that's just me. Check out Locked On Bulldogs. I'm sure Clint and Daniel have more thoughts on it than I do, more informed thoughts on it than I do. But check out all those shows, as well as check out Peacock and Williamson to get the wrap up of all the Week 5 matchups from this past Sunday, as well as your preview for Monday Night Football on Peacock and Williamson. Find them all, Locked On Sports Atlanta, on the same podcast platforms that you're currently listening and or watching Locked On Falcons. Guys, really appreciate it. Till then.